Oh, but
really
it's
cool.
just unbelievable how it just affected only one part, and then right next door, there's nothing there.
Absolutely, yeah. It's fascinating. So right now we're going to be looking to the left of the boat. We got these two little brown buildings. They were boat houses. And we had somebody stay here over the winter keeping a fire. And that's because a lot of the boats in the whole nation, and especially here in Yellowstone, were made out of wood. And so during the summer they would kind of expand that hot weather and the water. However, in the winter, temperatures get very, very cold around here. By cold, I mean negative 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the lowest. So what happened was these boats would crack. And in order to prevent that, they would have somebody stay here over the winter, and they would keep a fire to tend to those boats. Very lonely job, I would say. I don't think I could do that. I'm a social butterfly. Okay, so as we look past these trees, there's a brown building kind of tucked behind there, and that used to be a fish hatchery from 1913 to about 1957. And the fish hatchery had native Yellowstone cutthroat trout. Eggs and fries were sent all over the world. Fries are baby fish. And yes, we exploited a resource here in Yellowstone. We were very successful at it too. We sent these eggs and fries all over the world. My coworkers Bob and Tina actually went to New Zealand several years ago. They saw a native Yellowstone cutthroat trout. So it's very successful. In 1957, we shut the operation down. And here in Yellowstone, as you continue to go through the park, maybe you listen to another park ranger or read some more history, you're going to notice we make a ton of mistakes as we reach this mission of preservation. I always like to remind people perspective. When Yellowstone became a national park in 1872, we didn't really have anybody to take care of it. We didn't have a handbook. And so all these mistakes were continued to be made. But as the mission gets more specific, especially when park rangers were here in the park in 1916, things changed very rapidly. And so we stopped operations like that. And it's in order to go towards that mission of conservation preservation. Next, we've got this yellow building, which is called the Lake Hotel. Anybody staying here?
We stayed there.
Okay, cool. It's a beautiful inside. Does it look anything like the Old Faithful Inn to you?
Oh, no.
No, okay.
No.
If you can imagine, the same person, the same architect is going to be responsible for this building, as well as Old Faithful Inn, as well as the arch in the north, that Roosevelt Arch. And as you can tell, all of them are very, very different. So this is called Colonial Revival. Old Faithful Inn is something rustic Western, and that's a term I have coined. So it's very different. And one of the cool things about the Robert Reamer, he was in his late 20s, and he was very experimental, and he wanted something that people from the East Coast, the elite, the very, very rich people coming to Yellowstone, he wanted them to feel comfortable. He wanted them to see the West can provide something just as classy as the East. He got his inspiration from a hotel in Florida. And so that is why we've got the pastel colors, the columns. It looks very southern, right? Whereas if you go to someplace like Old Faithful Inn, it doesn't look like a somewhere you would see in the East. And he wanted to play around with that. And for years and years and years, people didn't really like the Old Faithful Inn. They were like, this is kind of dirty. This is gross. And one of the reasons why is because if you go inside, all of those logs, as you can see today, they're polished off, and you can see the pine bark beetle markings in there. Prior, that actually used to be bark. And so the whole thing used to be a lot darker than it is today. And that's one of the reasons why people didn't really want to stay there. But now, anybody coming to Yellowstone, or maybe to the West for the first time from the East, they expect the Old Faithful, and they expect the Western rustic look. Whereas something like this, people are like, whoa, what is this doing in Yellowstone? It looks so unnatural. But that is what they expected so far. In the future, we're looking at this as something that it pops right off of the landscape, and every other building here is brown, except for this one. And there have been proposals to paint this brown, actually. How would you feel about that?
No.
Okay. And there have been proposals to tear the whole thing down. How'd you feel about that?
No.
Yeah.
No.
One of the reasons why is because Yellowstone is not immune to the politics or the outside world. And when we go through the Great Depression, we had the World Wars, not very many people are coming into Yellowstone. And so this hotel became a liability, and it cost so much more money to run than we were taking in. And so Robert Reamer himself actually approved of plans to tear the whole thing down. He's like, you know what? If we're not making a profit off of it anymore, we might still keep the Old Faithful in. I'm fine. I don't mind building something smaller. Another idea to attract more middle-income people is to actually build a road through the very middle of that hotel, so kind of split it in half and take a chunk out. And the road would lead straight to those affordable cabins behind, depending on your version of affordable, behind the Lake Hotel. And all these attempts were made. However, this hotel remained intact throughout all those years, all the different changing plans, and now it is the oldest running hotel with people staying in the National Park Service. And so you must remember, this is National Park Service land, therefore you own it as well. Yeah, you got a question? It was built in initially it was 1898.
1891 it opened.
1991 it opened. 1891, I'm sorry. I haven't done this boat tour in a while. 1891, the renovation happened in 1903, 1904. It always had that yellow slab of paint on it, but the elegance that we see today was not what it was like back then. Next, we're going to talk about this little tiny brown building right there with the green door. Can everybody see that? Mm-hmm. So that used to be a gas station. It was a very popular one. It's one of the first ones here in the park. Automobiles were allowed in the park in 1915, 1916, and this is where they would stop to gas up. Prior to that, that was a grave site of Dave Edwards. Like I mentioned before, we have people staying here over the winter to take care of our wooden boats. Well, a man named E.C. Waters, a very corrupt businessman here on the water, he owned a boat business, and one of his boats, he named after himself, is going to be found shipwrecked on that island. Prior to it being shipwrecked, it was a very big boat. It could carry 300 passengers, I believe, and it looked a lot like this. So in order to have somebody take care of it over the winter, it's obviously way too big in that little building, so he kept it on this island. Dave Edwards was responsible for coming out, checking up on it, making sure everything's okay. Unfortunately, one day in the fall, he has a heart attack. And his body gets swept up on shore, and the cavalry that was taking care of Yellowstone at the time, they just put his body right next to the Lake Hotel, and they figured E.C. Waters, he'll take care of it, he'll send it back to their family. E.C. Waters never takes care of it, and in fact they add even more things to the gravesite because people at the time, there's a lot of fatalities on the water. They're wearing their nice dresses, their top hats, they're not ready to go swimming. It's on average about 41 degrees Fahrenheit. So we had a lot of fatalities, and so they threw some limbs in there. Any body parts that they found, they threw in the same grave as Dave Edwards. Eventually, the gravesite gets paved over, but not for the construction workers. As the story goes, the construction workers took the white cross and just kind of moved it uphill. They were too afraid to move the body. And so they paved right over it, slapped a gas station on top of it. So now I say, if you're coming around here 7:30, 8 p.m. and you're driving by, see some lights flickering, maybe a little bit. That is Dave Edwards saying, hello, I'm still here. Nobody brought me back to my family, my home. I'm still in Yellowstone. So it's just one of those funny little ghost stories we have here in Yellowstone. The next brown building we're going to be taking a look at is this little ranger station up there with the antenna sticking out of the roof. And that ranger station is the very first one in the National Park Service. And do you know Yogi Bear, Hanna-Barbera?
Oh, sure.
That ranger station is what it's based off of.
Really?
Yes. And so the superintendent at the time had worked with Hanna-Barbera, and one of the things they did was also work on stop having people feed bears. And so if you came here in the 60s, you would see Yogi Bear holding a sign saying, do not feed the bears. And it's one of the things where we had personified them, made them seem so friendly and lovable that people wanted to feed them and take care of them. But as we know, if you habituate an animal and feed them, they're not going to know what to do when the hordes of people leave the park. They're not going to be looking for those natural resources like an elk calf or even fishing. So it's one of those examples of, one, they say it's a miracle that these bears aren't so troublesome even today. And we work so hard on making sure that none of you feed them and you understand that these animals are wild. Yellowstone is not a zoo. You came into a completely wild and natural landscape. But this is just a really cool marker of history. So as we scoot along, do we have something in the water?
I think it's just a piece of wood. Stick.
Oh, just wood. Okay. We can pretend it is. Yeah.
Regarding the that big steamboat, I heard it was the Park Service that tried to burn it down?
Oh, we were successful. We burned it down. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, has anybody seen at the Lake Lodge? Okay, well, I recommend going in there. It's really rustic and it's really beautiful in there. It reminds me of Roosevelt Lodge, actually. What used to be there is a tent camp. And this is one of the first forms of glamping in the West. Does everybody know what glamping is? I call it glamour camping. It's the only camping that's right. No, I'm just kidding. So, it's these wonderful striped tents, and that's how you'll know it's a W.W. Wiley tent camp. W.W. Wiley was an entrepreneur from Bozeman, Montana. He used to be a teacher, and he saw all these people coming into Yellowstone and making a crap ton of money. He thought, how can I get to Yellowstone? How can I make all this money? So what he did is he saw the prices were astronomical at the Lake Hotel, $4 a night. And so he said, you know what, I'm going to charge $2 a night, target the middle class. And they're going to stay in these beautiful little areas. I'll pass this around, make sure to flip it to the other side. And this is just one example of the W.W. Wiley tent camp. One of the reasons why he's different from all the other resources available at the time for touring Yellowstone is he encouraged education and entertainment. And so he not only wanted people to stay here and enjoy the park, but when they came here in the evenings, he had people playing music, dances, all that, partying. They were loud, and it was just a really great time. In the day, he would have college students that he paid from the local universities to show people around Yellowstone. And they would try or an attempt to explain what's actually going on here on the landscape. Of course, a lot of the information we have today is rather new, but it's really one of the first attempts of educating the public and interpreting the resources that we have here. So much like what I'm doing today. And it's neat that he hired some of the college students, and it sets a precedent for what we do today. A lot of the Xanterra people were on a Xanterra boat, restaurants, hotels, lodges, little grocery stores you see around town, or around the park. A lot of them are going to be those college students. So it really sets a precedent for hiring those younger people to explore the park and to show the visitors. As we continue on, we're going to be, it's tough for me to see, I have terrible eyesight, but anybody cross the fishing bridge? Okay, all the time probably. If you work here, you probably cross out. I cross every single day. Construction's pretty bad this year, but if you do get a chance, that is one of the most historical bridges here in the park. We call it Fishing Bridge because people used to fish there, and they would be elbow to elbow, butt to butt with their not fly rods. What are they called? Spin casts.
Casting reels.
Just casting reels. Sorry, I'm a fly fisher. I have a hard time with regular fishing. Just with their regular fishing rods, and on average, you would catch over 100 fish an hour. So why was it so successful? We found out later that that is a native Yellowstone cutthroat spawning ground. And so that is why it was so easy for people to catch fish there. It wasn't until the 1970s that we cut that out. And we still call it the fishing bridge, which causes a lot of confusion. I've had to stop a lot of families. No, there's no fishing here. It's very confusing. But yeah, we keep that up because the sign itself, I don't know if the name will ever change, because it kind of shows what happened in the past and why we stopped letting people do that. And again, every year, I'm going to say every year, we're moving closer and closer to that mission of conservation and preservation. And that's just one of the greatest steps we've taken. And so now we see tons of pelican in that area. I've seen them scoop fish out of there. We've got bald eagles hunting there. I have seen grizzlies in that area, not necessarily fishing, but taking a bath. But yeah, lots of animals will congregate in that area looking for those fish. Cool. Any questions about that? Okay, so next we're going to go up to, somebody mentioned the burned boat. We're going to go up there to the shipwrecked of E.C. Waters boat.